Hello, and welcome to another rousing edition of Chapter Lectures. I'll be your host and professor, Dr. B. Oh, wait, you already know that. Well, without further ado, let's get right to one of my favorite chapters. I do shorten it for you guys because I want to squeeze everything in that we can. So, this is a 2-lecture chapter, and I hope you enjoy. This is definitely one of the most interesting ones to me. Today we're going to talk about social psychology. If we look at the picture here, it's about how we deal with one another. In social psychology, we talk about people's relationships with one another. So looking at these words that are surrounding the topic of social psychology: worker, counselor, doctor, psychiatrist, young, stress, person, unhappy, upset, discussion, business, fear, adult, right? There's a lot of different things to unpack here. So let's talk about what a social psychologist does and what they study. So, of course, we always start every chapter with a definition. So in this case, we talk about social psychology being, or how we label it, is the scientific study of how we think about, influence, and relate to others, to one another, how you and I have a relationship, how we tend to treat people better that have something in common with us. Like if you cheer for the same team, you might treat that person better than somebody that cheers for the opposite team if you've just met them. So social psychologists try to use the scientific methods that we learned about in chapter 1 to try and study how people think about, influence, and relate to one another. Why is it that I act a certain way when it's just me and Dr. C? We act really wild and crazy. I act a little bit differently when I'm around you guys, and I act differently when I'm just with my wife. If we go to her parents' house in Bakersfield, I act a little bit differently. So why is it that different people influence us to act different ways? And why is it that we may treat people differently based on certain things? In social psychology, this is where we deal with issues of racism and sexism and biases. And let me tell you, we all have biases. Don't be fooled in thinking that you're bias free. In fact, one of the next things that you're going to do, your homework assignment, is to take this test called an implicit test to see where you may have biases and to write a little bit about it. So you'll get maybe a little taste for that and see what happens. So basically social psychologists study the social influences that explain why the same person will act differently in different situations. That's exactly what I was trying to describe, how if it's just me and the kiddo, I'm a different version, maybe, than it is with just my wife and I, than it is with me at school, right? Things like that, where you have to be professional or this or that, right? You're almost playing a different role, so to speak. Not that you're an actor, but I'll try and clue you in on exactly what I mean by that. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss is looking at other people's behavior. So this is one of the things that our implicit automatic brain kind of does and takes over for things that, it feels it can handle, so that you can be free to, I don't know, listen to your music or think about other things you need to do or plan out your day. So from a Western cultural perspective, and if you don't know the difference, Western is very much more individualistic as opposed to Eastern culture, which is very collective and they do things collectively. We tend to make this thing, this error called the fundamental attribution error. And this is where you tend to see somebody, especially if you've never met them before, if you don't know them, and you see them act a certain way or behave a certain way, and you tend to automatically attribute their behavior to some sort of long-term internal factor, as opposed to the fact that you don't know the situation, and you don't think about maybe the situation itself is actually causing the problem, unless it's you, of course. So what does that mean? Well, what does it say here? That underestimating the influence of the situation, but overestimating the effects of stable, enduring traits. The behavior is more readily attributed to the influence of the situation. However, we tend to, again, automatically go to somebody's long-term traits. So what does this mean? And can you put it in a way I can understand? Well, of course. So let's say that you are at Starbucks, right? And you're the fifth, sixth person in line, and you see a person at the very front of the line. Doesn't matter if it's male or female, right? Um, but you see somebody at the front of the line, and they are just waiting for their coffee. And their coffee comes back, and it's wrong. And being Starbucks, they probably spelled the person's name wrong. And all of a sudden, you see this person just kind of go ballistic, just pop, right? They throw the cup against the wall, tell the barista they suck, that their drink is completely wrong and it's horrible, right? And what's the first thing that comes to your mind? When I ask this question in class, I usually get that person's a jerk, they're an asshole, that they're unstable, or things like that. And that first thing that pops up, right, is what we call the fundamental attribution error, or fundamental attribution error. I gotta pronunciate it right. Enunciate it. I know, I'm just messing around. So we think if somebody cuts us off in traffic, that they're just an a-hole, or somebody yells at their barista and it's not the barista's fault necessarily, that person is a jerk in real life all the time. We've never met this person. We just know that this person is not acting the way a person should in line at Starbucks, apparently, right? So we tend to attribute it to some long-term, stable, enduring trait, like that person's a jerk in everyday life, that person's just an a-hole, that person likes to treat others badly. We have no idea. And that's the fact that our brain goes to that specifically, right away, is a problem. Because what if it was you that was in line, and maybe that day, your significant other said, "It's not me, it's you, I'm out, peace." Maybe your dog ran away. Maybe somebody close to you passed away. Or maybe even all of the above. And all you want to make sure that you have the start of a better day is to get your favorite type of coffee and make sure that the people at Starbucks know who you are. And all of a sudden it comes back, wrong drink, wrong name, all of this. That might have caused you to snap too. Maybe you're a little more calm under pressure, maybe not. But you know that it was the influence of the situation. It was building up inside you. You've had one really bad day and it's not even 10 o'clock yet. And then bam, this happens, right? We have no idea about these people's behavior, but we tend to make this error and think that it's some long, stable trait. So explaining and attributing actions like this and labeling someone inside your head, or maybe even out loud, as a jerk or an a-hole or a chronic abuser or something like that, right, can have really big real life social consequences and economic effects. If somebody was accused of, rape or murder, and they got wrongly sent to prison, even if the case was reopened and they got freed, and realized, told people it was just a misunderstanding, they're probably still labeled as a convict, even though they never actually committed the crime, right? What happens if you're labeled a convict? Do you get a special card that says, "I was actually innocent"? Sometimes they give you a little extra money for doing that and taking away your freedom wrongfully. But you still have that label. and it may still haunt you when it comes time to find a job and things like that, right? So the way that we label people in society, and our brain is quick to do it automatically, can have really big effects on people's lives, as we'll see in some of these videos that you're going to watch. So the fundamental attribution error, again, is analyzing others' behavior. And when you're analyzing it, we tend to overestimate the influence of their personal traits: jerk, don't care, a-hole, right? Doesn't care for others, all of this stuff. Like, this is their personality trait in everyday life. And we couldn't possibly know what else is going on. So automatically our brain tends to underestimate the effects of the situation. What we're going to talk about as we go through, and especially into the next chapter on personality, there's a whole theory based on the fact that the situation that you're in is probably the biggest influence or most powerful influence of how you act in the moment, regardless of your, personality traits. But we'll get to that in time. So, of course, for us, this fundamental attribution error is most likely to occur when a stranger acts badly and we have no idea anything about this person. And as I pointed out, it has real life and social consequences if somebody's labeled the wrong way, right? Think of I love all these memes these days with the Karens, right? The white lady who's so suspicious that she calls the police on everybody or wants to speak to their manager, right? That whole thing. And yes, there have been memes that calling people Karens is also offensive, which, yeah, kind of is, right? So, um, it's a situation where we couldn't possibly know what was going on with that person, but yet we make a judgment, this attribution error, because that's what our brain automatically does. We categorize things and we free up room for us to be able to think about other things, because the brain thinks that this is the most efficient way of doing things. And even though it may be efficient, it could have really negative consequences. So a lot of times when people say, I'm not racist, there may be a little bit of truth to that, in the sense that automatic judgment comes out looking racist, right? So we'll hold off on that for a sec. There was a study done in 1979 by Napolitan and colleagues that had somebody, they basically paid an actor, or they told somebody to act out in class. So the teacher was holding a class and one student was basically being disruptive. The others were making this fundamental attribution error and attributing the behavior of this one student that just couldn't get it together to personal traits, right? And personality traits. And then when they were debriefed and the other students were told, no, this was actually just part of an experiment, they still said, nope, it's his personality. Even though the researchers, or the teacher in this situation said, no, 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 this person was an actor. They were just told to disrupt the class. It didn't matter. People had already made their judgment and they stuck with it, right? So even if they were informed that they were doing this, they sort of doubled down on it, right? So it makes me think about today's world, and all of these people that are supporting Trump and saying he's the greatest president. And every time something happens that we can point out a fallacy, they double down and they go, no, this is you just spinning it, and this is that. They've made their judgment. There's no turning around. There's no, trying to reason with them, right? They've done this. So we can see evidence of it today as well. So looking at the person in this picture who's obviously homeless or somebody down on their luck, this would be the start of a little bit of a discussion I would hope to give in class, which obviously we can't do here. But the question is, do we attribute poverty and homelessness to social circumstances, down on their luck, mentally ill and can't get through life by themselves, that they maybe drug addiction problem and just couldn't straighten themselves out, so they ended up without a home, right? This is a person that is in need of some assistance. Or do you view this as personal dispositions? This person's too lazy, they don't want to get a job, They'd rather just panhandle for money, and this is not the American way. And, why should I help them if they weren't willing to do the things for themselves? This tends to, right, however you feel about this tends to reflect political views. Most of the people at ELAC, and a lot of the people in California in general, are these social circumstances, right? This person's down on their luck. They could use a hand, a shower, maybe help them with a job interview, something like that. And on the conservative side, the Trump side, you hear, oh, this person did this to themselves. If they would help themselves more, why should I give them some of my hard-earned money to get them back on their feet when they obviously, created this situation for themselves? And so how you feel about that tends to a lot of times reflect your political views. And, we don't get a chance to discuss this, but that's the way that it tends to be, right? And that's our attribution question. So if you're making a judgment based on the fact that this person needs help or the fact that this person should help themselves, that tends to be along the lines of how you vote. So when we talk about automatic sort of judgments and feelings, we have to introduce the idea of people's attitudes. Now, I know a lot of times you think an attitude is when you get a certain tone or a certain annoyed response to a parent's question or something like that. Well, that's partially right. So an attitude is defined as feelings or a feeling that's influenced by our beliefs that predispose our reactions to things, to objects, to people, to events. If you get a visceral reaction when somebody says something, and again, we all have our own biases, as I will attempt to show you guys, this is not just what you think about it, but how it makes you feel and how you react. And this is even before you put any rational, explicit, conscious thought into it, right? If somebody just tells you, like, I'll tell you that I'm not a fan of Boston sports teams. So if somebody just says, oh, how about those Patriots? I get that visceral, ugh, right? I'm a Dolphins fan and a 49ers fan because I grew up in the era of Dan Marino and Joe Montana. I was not a Raiders fan because they played in the same stadium as USC, and no thanks. These attitudes can actually guide unconsciously how we react to things and how we what things we gravitate towards or against, right? So attitudes don't qualify for rational thought. You get a reaction by things, you have this object or person or event, and it gives you a reaction that predisposes anything, right? So your attitude affects the way that you behave when it becomes conscious, or maybe it's guided by this unconscious attitude that you do things, avoiding things, making a reaction, making a judgment on things, like the fundamental attribution error. Maybe if the person is a different gender than you, what if they're a different sexual preference than you, a different race than you? That doesn't always mean the person is necessarily a racist or things like that. But when we talk about things like racism, as we'll get into in the second lecture of this chapter, then we have to bring up the idea of what is the best way to try to counteract these automatic measures is to try to make the unconscious conscious, right? So when you are trying to tell your side of the story, and we have a huge divide right now, there's a lot of people that think this virus was created sort of in a biological warfare type of situation in a lab in China, whether by accident or on purpose. There's a lot of conspiracy theories about 5G towers, and that's really what's causing this whole thing, or the government trying to get our rights. And people are guided by these attitudes. And the problem is in a pandemic, in a situation like this, you have your emotions that are also evoked, right? That's an automatic thing. You're scared, you're upset, you're this, you're that. And what that does is emotions actually make these attitudes come out stronger and faster. So if you add some sort of emotional response along with these attitudes, it makes a really strong response. Again, it's automatic, right? So when you are trying to attempt to get people to understand your side of things, there are two sort of ways that you can persuade them. One of them more just tries to get their attitudes and emotions involved, and it's a more try to do it in sort of a thoughtless way. A lot of these news outlets like Fox News and, the fake media, quote unquote, tends to show you a headline, or they tend to give you a quick clip, maybe out of context. And this is called the peripheral route persuasion. So they're trying to change your mind or trying to get you to buy into whatever they're saying by using these little incidental cues. And it's meant to keep you, to keep your brain automatic. It's meant to make you angry, to evoke emotions. It's meant to produce relatively thoughtless changes, right? Fast changes. By showing you this, oh, you should be disgusted. By showing you a clip of that or taking this out of context and giving you little cues, almost like priming you, right? Like we talked about in the memory chapter, to get you to buy in. A central route persuasion is one when we think about all the people that are saying they don't want to wear masks. I got into a discussion with my friend's brother that he was saying, I don't want to wear a mask and you can't tell me to, it's my freedom. It's like, okay, well, could you just do it to make others, even if you don't believe it, do it to make others feel better? Well, this and that. And then he started spouting off about how it doesn't actually protect you. And he talked about the micron sizes of the virus germs, and then talked about how your own bacteria in the mask is actually worse for you than trying to breathe in somebody else's, blah, blah, blah. And that we need good bacteria for our immune system to stay healthy. And I'm thinking, these are the people that just go with what they believe. They're going down the rabbit hole on the internet with YouTube videos and things like this. And now they're the scientist trying to tell me, who's spent years and years in school doing this and teaches it, how to specifically research scientifically. Okay, buddies, you go on and do that. So a central route of persuasion offers at least evidence and arguments to trigger thoughtful responses. As a psychologist, and as a professor, it is my duty to give you the research behind why I make the statements I do. Anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers, which is what I'm going to call them now, they don't necessarily do that, because all the things that they offer as evidence are only the things that refute what science says. So the central route persuasion is actually trying to bring to life conscious, thoughtful responses, as opposed to the peripheral route, which likes to remain unconscious, implicit, right? Visceral reaction. So with your attitude, obviously, the automatic attitude can modify or can lead to specific actions, can cause you to act a certain way or believe a certain way or not believe a certain thing. But your actions can also modify your attitude sometimes, where you're a doer and not just a thinker. In this case, right, by acting a certain way, you may be able to counteract your automatic. You may be able to override the implicit automatic functions and judgments of your brain. So, one of the ways that we see how actions can modify attitudes is by using what's called the foot in the door phenomenon. So, as you can see, the foot in the door phenomenon involves a compliance with a large request after having previously agreed to a smaller request. So what does that mean? Well, that means that if I came up to you and said, hey, times are hard right now, I need to borrow $100. You might say, whoa, 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 whoa. It's not like I have a lot of money, and $100 is a lot. I don't think, I was only in class with you for a few weeks, so I don't know Um, I don't know that I'm comfortable giving you that. And I would say, okay, that's cool, right? However, what if I came to you one day, let's say before all of this started, and I asked for maybe $10. I said, you know what? I want to go to the cafeteria. My buddy Ralph, who cooks there, he's he's making these delicious chicken sandwiches. They're like $7. Can I borrow $10 for lunch? Because I totally forgot my card at home. I didn't bring any cash with me. And so you say, okay, I can give you $10. So you give me $10, and then the next week, I pay you back. And so you've already agreed and complied to a small request, and and I paid you back and everything. So then maybe the next time, like, oh, we're preparing for this pandemic. Can I borrow $100? If you've already said yes to the 10 and I've already paid you back, chances are you're more likely to say yes in this case to the $100. And so just by me getting my foot in the door, asking for something small, then I can ask for something bigger in the end. Um, an example I like to give in class is how I actually got into UCLA. So UCLA was always my dream school. I went to community college at Santa Monica right after high school, and then I got into Cal State Northridge for undergrad. So it wasn't until, I was basically done, just ready for a PhD program. And the way that I found out about who I wanted to work with at UCLA was went and did a little research, um, not the anti-vaxxer kind, and I found a professor at UCLA whose research interests were matched. I matched, and I wanted to see if I could work with him. And even if I couldn't get into a program with him, I wanted to try and build some experience and get some lab experience and work with animals and things like that. So I emailed him and asked if I could work in his lab for free. And most professors love free student labor. So I worked with him. I probably worked in the lab 8 hours a week. So 2 hours in the morning for 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, running animals and learning how things went in the lab. When it came time for me to apply for graduate programs, for PhD programs, I told him, I said, I was going to ask you for a letter of rec, but you've already done so much for me. I'm just letting you know that I'm applying to UCLA in the program to work with you. And so I'm not going to ask you for a letter of rec because you've already allowed me to volunteer in your lab, which was, again, a win-win because he liked the free labor. Eventually, I was able to get into UCLA, and it wasn't until about 2 years after I got in that one of the other professors that worked down there in the lab next to ours asked me one day if I knew how I got accepted to the program, or did I just know that I got accepted? And I said, no, I have no idea. I know that there was only 4 people in this behavioral neuroscience that were accepted, but I don't know specifically the process because that's a closed door thing. And he said, well, let me tell you, because you came from a Cal State, he said that, you didn't have every scientific class that they wanted for neuroscience because, frankly, CSUN doesn't offer all of them. And so they said, grades were pretty good. Your graduate test scores were pretty good. But they thought, there were other candidates that might have been a little stronger than you at the beginning, at that moment. And it was your advisor that stepped up and said, look, he's been working in my lab. We already have a sort of a research plan in place. So I vouch for him. I'll take him, even if he has to take a couple extra classes. And that's how I got into UCLA. So that is my version of the foot in the door phenomenon. I wanted to get into the graduate program. And if I just said, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I'd like to get in your program, so I'm going to apply, and I'll see you hopefully if they give me an interview. I went the other route. I went the foot in the door. I said, hey, can I volunteer in your lab and just see if it's for me? And I really like your research, so I'd like to just get involved in it. So after having complied with a small request, which was for me to learn from him, then when it came time for the bigger request, like being funded and getting into the #1 program in the country, he was like, yes, I vouch for him. I already know him. He's established here. So I did it. I got my foot in the door, and it worked in my favor. And I often ask the question, was it just me, or is this a sort of a good way to work the system in the future. So one of my professors from Northridge that I worked with, she had another student that had similar interests, a girl named Tracy. And so Tracy had emailed, I said, have her email me and I'll see. And so I asked Tracy, what do you want to do? What type of research looks like the type of thing that you want to do? And it happened to be that professor that told me how my advisor vouched for me. And so I had her email him and do the same thing, and it perfectly worked. She got into, not only did she get into his program, but she was in the office next to his for the last couple of years of her program, and she was his basically main assistant for his lab. So not saying it's going to work every time, but it did have a proven track record, at least with us at UCLA. So thumbs up to the foot in the door phenomenon. Of course, we know that this is true for the good things, but it's also true for the bad things. So when we talk about the foot in the door phenomenon, that if you are asked to, maybe not rob a bank, but be the getaway driver when others rob the bank so they can get away. If you do a small request, chances are that will enable you in the next time to be one of the people that's holding somebody up at gunpoint, right? If we think about, and I'm going to relate a lot of this behavior back to Nazi Germany and Hitler and the Holocaust, because it just seems to naturally gravitate there, and you'll see with some of these videos, that if you ask people to do something small, like believe in them, join them, go to a rally, then they can do unspeakable things, because you've already sort of gotten your foot in the door. So just believe me on this, and it turns out to be something, comply with a smaller request, and then when it comes time to try to eliminate an entire race or, of people, an entire sector of people, then it's, maybe it's a little bit easier because you've already complied with the smaller request. The other thing about actions that can affect your attitudes is something that we call role playing. And role playing includes acting a social part by following guidelines for expected behavior. Now, after you go through this lecture, I want you to watch the videos that I have included, and to get an idea about this idea. That sounds very redundant. To get an idea about this phenomenon of role playing. So when I talked about the fundamental attribution error, and I talked about people, basically getting labeled, sometimes if you already know that you're labeled as this or that, you just sort of end up acting the part. And so sometimes the role we play in society, or the role we're given by society, we tend to actually get more into it than we ever thought. We are acting a social part because we're following the guidelines for that expected behavior. Oh, well, if you're a professor, you're supposed to act this way. Or if you're this, you're supposed to act that way. And a lot of times we conform to that. We play the role that we're given, depending on our job or status or things like that. And so there was a study done in 1971 called, pretty famous experiment called the Stanford Prison Experiment. And in the Stanford Prison Experiment, the researcher, Philip Zimbardo, wanted to know if people would actually start to get into the roles that they were given. So let me set this up for you, and then you can watch the clip that I have provided after. So he wanted to do a study where half of the people would be prison guards, and the other half would be assigned to be prisoners, and he'd basically just make them interact in a role-playing game. He turned the basement of the Stanford psychology building into a makeshift jail in order to make it look real. So it's not just like, oh, cardboard setup and kids are playing, and some of them are cops and some of them are robbers, right? This is for adults, and it's actually staged to look real, to feel real. So he got a bunch of mostly white males, because that's, you know, the population of Stanford in the early 70s. Everybody was the same, right? Everybody that was recruited was similar, probably, you know, socioeconomic background, belief systems, things like that. And so what they did was they randomly assigned people. They put an ad out in the paper and said that they were looking for volunteers that would get paid $15 a day, which in 1971 as a college student, you're like, heck yeah, um, to do an experiment for up to 2 weeks where they would have to, you know, play a role. So people were pre-screened to make sure there were no pre-existing mental health issues. Everybody was mentally sound, um, psychologically fit, and they were pretty much the same, right? Before the experiment. So half of them were randomly assigned to be prison guards. The other half were randomly assigned to be prisoners. And the day of the experiment, the ones that were prisoners were actually arrested by local police and went through an entire process of um, being hosed down, deloused, being blindfolded so they didn't see where they were going. So they didn't know they were in the basement of the Stanford building when they got there. And none of them had ever been arrested before, so it's not like they knew what being arrested was like. For all they knew, you get, you know, hosed down and blindfolded and all of this stuff. So day one comes around and nothing really happens. The prisoners are kind of just hanging in the cells. Prison guards are just kind of like, you know, patrolling outside. But by day two and beyond, we see a huge difference in change. All of a sudden, if the prisoners were feeling oppressed, they acted out a little bit, and all of a sudden, the prison guards started getting their authority, were the ones in charge, and started acting like it. They started playing the roles they were given. And I will let you watch the video to see how that played out. But it was a very interesting social experiment, and what it showed is that people will often play the role that they're given, even though before the experiment there was no difference between the people who were assigned to be prisoners and prison guards. When given these roles and given a little bit of time to let them act, you know, get used to their role, they started playing the roles. So the prison guards would start, you know, telling the prisoners what to do and clean toilets and this and that, and impose sanctions and punishments and, you know, all of that good stuff. So please watch the video, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So these are two ways that our actions can actually modify our attitudes and cause us to comply with other requests, or to even just, you know, psychologically become the role in which we're assigned. So again, the foot in the door phenomenon is agreeing to a small request, and if they do that, they find it easier later to agree to a larger one. So I gave you the example of borrowing a little bit of money than a lot, or volunteering in a lab and then getting in a program, but it also right, works in the negative way. So our attitudes predispose our actions can modify our attitudes, and our attitudes can also follow our behavior. So it's kind of a circular pattern. Think about, I've been watching a lot of the Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and we talk about how you know, maybe he couldn't win it all at the beginning because he was very involved in himself and didn't maybe make his teammates better and things like that. And it took a while to get over the hump. Needed the right coach, needed the right philosophy, needed to pass the ball more maybe. So in this case, cooperative actions like those performed on people by people on sports teams feed a mutual liking. Right, so there might have been a modest amount of winning, but no championships at the beginning. And then all of a sudden, he bought into Phil Jackson's triangle offense. And even though he was the main key, there was a lot of passing and trusting and believing in the teammates. And these attitude changes can promote more positive behavior. So he became seen as a winner, as a team leader, somebody to make his maybe somebody to make his teammates better, whether it was by threatening them or by trusting them, not really sure, but it worked, right? And in the end, If you haven't been following along, Michael Jordan won 6 championships with the Bulls. So sometimes it works in reverse, right? Our attitudes can influence our behavior. Our attitudes can also follow our behavior, right? So instead of thinking just about contracts and how good your personal stats are, if you start buying into the team philosophy and it feeds mutual liking and that leads to more winning, especially meaning winning at all, then that becomes a pattern, right? It feeds mutual liking of your teammates. And these attitudes of changing from me to let's win, us, can promote positive behavior. Could it also promote negative behavior? Of course, right? That's sort of the idea in this chapter, is that it can lead to both good and bad, positive and negative types of behaviors. Foot in the door phenomenon, role playing, right? All of these things. So a lot of times we talking about how our actions follow or our behaviors follow from attitudes. These ideas of our attitudes and our actions do not always fit with one another, right? There's many times where we may do something and we don't necessarily mentally agree with it. Our attitude does not fit with the way we behave, but we do it because we're pressured into it, or we feel like it's a temporary thing. And when our attitudes and our actions are at war with one another, or they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, it makes us feel really, really uncomfortable. So a lot of times what we will do, because that tension makes us uncomfortable, is we will bring one of these ideas, either our attitude or our actions, together and try to reduce this discomfort, because the body does not like to be, the brain, the mind does not like to be at odds with itself, right? So this is a theory by a man named Leon Festinger, and he called it cognitive dissonance theory. He says that when we have our thoughts and our actions, our attitudes and our actions are not congruent or compatible, we change one or reduce one to meet the other. We reduce this idea of, we reduce this cognitive dissonance. So we act to reduce this discomfort or dissonance when we feel our thoughts clash with our actions. So what's an example of this cognitive dissonance? Well, I like to use the example of a person that's joining a fraternity or sorority. There is a Hell Week, and there is a initiation process where a lot of times, almost like a gang initiation, that people have to go through embarrassing things, or they have to drink a lot of alcohol, or they used to get hit with like wooden paddles and things like that, but hazing has been reduced in the last 20 years because it's been seen as cruel and unusual. But people do this, and it's like, why would you put yourself through that? Do you like getting embarrassed? Do you like being mean to other people? Why do you do this? Your actions are different than your thoughts. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be put through this. I don't want to be embarrassed. So this causes what Festinger called cognitive dissonance. So why do people still go through this? And how does this work? Well, what they do is they try to reduce this discomfort by putting their thoughts and try to rationalize it, their actions, right? So they're saying things like, oh, it's just a week. Once I get through this, I'm going to be part of this really exclusive club that I want to be part of. And of course, as social creatures, we all want to belong to somebody or some club or some group that we feel connected with. So, oh, if I have to do a couple of silly, stupid little things just to get into this club, it's only a week of this hell for, potentially many years of being in this exclusive club. So they bring their thoughts in line to rationalize their actions, right? We do this all the time. When you're going to the gym, there are a few people that really like putting their body through the rigor, shall we say, of a strong program like a CrossFit, but not necessarily people really like that. So I know that the reason people show up is because their attitudes are, well, I need to be more disciplined. I know I see it as a challenge and I can do this, even though it may not be your favorite thing in the world, right? People do it. Why are you still here attending this class, even though, the world is strange around you? Because you tell yourself, I need this to succeed and make more money and things like that. So through cognitive dissonance, we often bring our attitudes in line with our actions. That's what Festinger says. And looking biologically, we even see in fMRIs that brain regions become more active when people experience cognitive dissonance. It's an uncomfortable feeling, right? In the emotional systems, when we are at war with what we think, right? When our thoughts and our actions are not in line, it's really, really tense, causes a lot of stress and discomfort. And so in order to reduce this discomfort, we tend to concede one way or the other. So this is a lot of times what leads to conformity in society and obedience. What we see a lot of times is that there's a lot of herd mentality, and that we tend to conform at least to social norms. What is a social norm? A social norm is something that society sees as appropriate type of behavior. So even if you don't agree with it, you still go along with it because that's what the norm is in society. That's what everybody is supposed to do, right? If we see the newest hashtag or social trend, we tend to want to know what's going on and how we can potentially be part of it. Clothing trends, a lot of times you see a celebrity or a new designer come out with some new fashion choice, and then you go with it. And a lot of times people will do that. In another video I have, which is actually from the 1950s on a show called Candid Camera, it is a social experiment where people are in an elevator. And, in an elevator, obviously you want to stand facing the exit doors. So when you get in, you turn around and face the front, push your button, and then you're ready to go when you get out. That's the social norm. But what were to happen if somebody else or everybody else in an elevator was facing the back of the elevator and basically turned around 180 degrees? Would you be the one, would you still stand regularly? Or because everybody else in the elevator was standing facing the back, would you then turn around and do that too? Because whoa, I don't want to be the standout, right? So this could be that idea of cognitive dissonance. You know what the right thing to do is based on the regular norm, facing forward, but everybody else in the elevator is facing back. So how long would it take you to conform and do the same thing? Or would you not? A lot of us think we are very strong and individualistic, and we would just, do what we normally do and not let the rest of society or the rest of the people in that elevator, influence us. But you'd be surprised exactly how many people would just conform to what everybody else did. In another study by Chartrand and colleagues in 1999, which you can read more about, of course, in the textbook, they demonstrated this thing called the chameleon effect. So college students basically had a teacher-type person sit and listen to a story. So there were two conditions. In the first condition, we'll call it the control condition. The person told a story, the participant told a story, and the person sitting behind the desk was just kind of listening to them and, okay, cool, yeah, I like that. And then afterwards, they were asked to rate the experience on a scale of 1 to 10 of how they felt with the person listening to their story. So that's just the person listening and kind of nodding along and being like, yeah, and just, showing that they're a good listener. In the experimental condition, they had the person mimic the body postures and positions of the person that was telling the story. So the other half of participants told a story, and if they crossed their right leg over their left, the person that's listening behind the desk would cross their right leg over their left. And if the person put their hand on their shoulders or put their hand on their face and put their elbow on the table, the person that was listening would do the exact same movement. So they would basically mimic and repeat, not in a condescending way, not in a sarcastic way, but just like if you put your hand in your face while you're talking, they put their hand on their face. And that was the only difference between groups. And then they asked that group, same thing, rate your experience on a scale of 1 to 10. And those people that were mimicked in the experimental group who, whether or not they even consciously were aware that this person was doing the same things they were, they tended to rate it higher than the people who were just, in the control group, just talking to the person. So what this showed was that automatic mimicry, right, sort of copying the postures and gestures of the person speaking, helps people to empathize and sort of relate to the person and feel what others feel. So if you've heard the term that flattery is the highest form of compliment or something like that, that is where sort of this comes from. The more we mimic people, not in a condescending way, but the more we mimic, the more we gesture like them, the greater the empathy is, and the more people tend to like us. And this is also a form of conformity. Again, you may notice it, it may be more subtle and you may not notice it, but that breeds more likability, more empathy, and things like that, right? So this leads us to our second big study, and the video that you're going to watch that corresponds to this. So you can stop and pause this recording and watch it, or you can just listen to this and then watch the videos after. But this idea of conformity, kind of like the elevator experiment, social experiment, there was a man named Solomon Asch, and his scenario was this. Imagine you're sitting in the classroom with me, and I were to show you a slide that has 3 lines, 3 different lengths of a line, and then you have to match it to the line that's on the side. So I show you a picture of a line on the left side, and on the right side there's A, B, and C. And the line is definitely the second one, B, right? The line on the left is the same size as B on the right. So A is too short, C is too long. So B would be the answer. And it's fairly obvious, right? It's not a hard concept. It's just match the line length to the right one. But let's say that you're in a row, right? We have our rows were six desks long. And let's say that you were in the back of the row and I started along your row and everybody else in front of you said the wrong answer. Everybody else said C. So I went down your row, and again, you're sitting in the back. C, 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 C. When it gets to you, what do you say? Well, Asch wanted to know exactly that. What he found from his conformity experiment is that, and other people since, that people are most likely to adjust their behavior or their way of thinking, this reducing the cognitive dissonance, to coincide with the group standard. And this is especially true when they feel incompetent or insecure. Well, if they're all saying C, then maybe there's something I'm not seeing, right? So maybe it is C. Maybe I should just say C, even though before you were very confident it was B, right? Hopefully you're still following along. If the group has at least 3 people. So in this experiment, I said there were 6 people in your row and you're the last one to answer. If everybody else is in agreement, are you going to make waves, even though you were fairly sure that the answer was B, but everybody else is saying C? So, what's going on there? Should I change my answer? What if you admire the group's status and attractiveness? When I gave you the example of the frat party, or the fraternity or sorority, and you're doing Hell Week, you admire the group's status and attractiveness. So if they say jump, you're going to say how high. If you've not already committed to your response, even though you know the right answer, a lot of times they tend to change their answer. If they know they're being observed, like in an experiment, and of course, especially in collectivist cultures, like the Eastern side of the world, if your culture encourages respect for social standards, then even though you know the answer is different, you're going to go with the majority. That's what Asch has found. And so in his study, this was his conformity experiment. The standard line there on the left, and then you have the comparison lines 1, 2, and 3. It's very easy to see, since they're so close together, that the standard line is 2 or B. But everybody else says 3 or C, right? So the question is, which of the 3 comparison lines on the left is equal to the standard line? The photo on the right was taken after 5 people who are working for Ash had answered C, or line 3. Now, if you look at the person that's number 6, you can literally see the cognitive dissonance in his face. You can see the discomfort, right, of him knowing what the right answer is, but everybody else saying the wrong answer, and there is a problem with what he knows and what everybody else is saying. So do you want to stand out as the only one giving that answer, or do you want to fit in with everybody else, right? So the student in the center shows severe discomfort that comes from disagreeing with the responses of the other members. And now he hasn't yet answered. So the question is he more likely to answer the right answer, which he knows, which is 2, or is he more likely to go with the others and answer 3? Well, like I said, I encourage you to watch Ash's conformity experiment as well and sort of draw your own conclusion on that. It's very easy to say, I'm going to walk into an elevator, and even though everybody else is turned around, I'm going to stay like I normally would. But you see a lot of people do it. It's easy for you to say, well, I know the answer is 2, so I'm going to say 2. But it's not as easy when everybody else has their eyes on you and you're in the actual situation, right? Again, our natural instinct is to reduce this discomfort, to reduce this cognitive dissonance. So then we ask the question, why do people conform? And people say that they conform for a lot of different reasons. The 2 main reasons we find in social psychology for conforming are to gain approval with others, because again, I said we like to belong. So this is why people go through hazing and Hell Week to get into a fraternity or sorority. That gang members get jumped to be initiated into a gang, right? To belong to something, to gain approval. You want to be liked. You want to be part of something. And so if that means having to give up some of your own ideals in order to get into this club or this, group, you do it. And sometimes people do it for social influence. And again, the Ash video talked about both of these things: social influence, normative social influence, and informational influence. So in the informational influence, you are trying to accept others' opinions as sort of your new information. And we see this a lot of times with political beliefs, and all of these people that are mad at a former NFL quarterback for kneeling during the national anthem and say that his protesting is disgusting. And these are the same people that are walking with masks and protesting outside of City Hall because they can't get a haircut or, get their nails done or things like that. So those are the 2 types of ways that many people conform. And then we talk about conforming has sort of many different faces. And so what you can see in this picture is people wearing all black with red dyed hair, and they claim to be non-conformists, right? So the question that's asked in this picture is, are these students asserting their individuality, or are they identifying themselves with some other of the same ideas as conforming, just in a very microculture? So what this reminds me of, in another video that I've given you guys with this, is the goth kids from South Park. I don't know how many of you guys are South Park fans, but the goth kids talk about how all the other people are just conformists and sheep and just going along with what society tells them, right? We're not sheep. We don't do that, except that they look exactly like each other. Everybody in that group, in the goth group, is dark, black hair, black clothes, acting exactly like one another. So, at the end of that video, conformists, and then everybody at the same time in unison says, yeah. which I think is just hilarious. So enjoy that South Park clip. When we look at things like how our friends and how society can influence us, we can turn to technology and social media to give us this idea about how we can influence one another to do things. And sometimes it just takes the right method, right? So in 2010, there was a congressional election day, and this one was when Facebook was about 3 or 4 years old. And Facebook decided they would try to get in and see if they could influence more people to turn out and vote. Now, again, this is congressional election day. This is not for president. This was not 2012. This was sort of the midterm election type of thing. So what they did was, as you see on top, they used an informational message that encouraged people to vote. They showed how many people voted. You know, this is just people on Facebook. And that didn't really seem to change the numbers much. And when people were asked about it, they didn't really pay much attention to that. So then Facebook decided to add another feature. And this is something that you see here, right? So it's basically the electronic version, social media version of the I voted sticker. So instead of saying how many people on Facebook voted, all the people that you're friends with on social media, they showed of your friends, so-and-so, and they show the pictures, and so many others on your friends list voted. And that, my friends, was the factor that really encouraged more people to get out and vote. So what you see at the bottom here is that the message, the informational versus the social message, right? The social message had measurably more influence when it was supplemented that showed which friends had voted. Well, man, we tend to compare ourselves to people in society and not just conform to what they do, right? So that was a really big influence on people, and said, oh, well, if Susie's voting, well, man, I better get out and vote too, right? Whether you did it because you admired that person, or whether you're like, wow, if Susie did it, I sure as heck should do it, because I'm not going to let Susie show me up. So maybe it's the power of influence that I'm not going to let this person beat me out, and it's a competitive thing. Or they say, look at that, this person who I really admire their status and the things that they do voted, so I should really do it too. Either way, it really caused an uptick in the number of people that showed up for this vote. So the social message was much more powerful than the informational message. And this is true, right? That's why they get celebrities to endorse products. You know, are you going to drink Nespresso just because it sounds or tastes good to you? Or are you going to do it because George Clooney dressed up in a really funny outfit and you love George Clooney? So if he's advertising for it, then man, right? Why did they put, if I go back to Michael Jordan, why did Wheaties sales do so well, or Nike sales? Because they, you know, right? Michael Jordan was on the cover of Wheaties, and Michael Jordan sold Air Jordans. And that caused a lot of people to buy them, to be like Mike. So we also know that suggestibility and mimicry, right? As we've talked about, both faces of good and bad behavior. When people copy each other, right, it's seen as a form of flattery, and learning to do the new dance moves and things like that. But again, we also are not without our faults, right? So a lot of times, violent things can be copied by people. You may have seen where serial killers had copycat killers. If we go back to the beginning of this culture of school shootings, the first real one that came out was in 1990. I want to say, yeah, it was in the late 90s. And it was on 4/20, and it was Colorado's Columbine high school shootings, where two disgruntled students decided that they've had enough and they were just going to shoot up the school. And guess what? Up until this pandemic, it was happening on a grand scale, especially in the last few years. So again, mimicry and suggestibility are not always good things. They can also lead to bad decisions and bad behaviors and things like that. Thinking about the Holocaust and the influence, the social influence that Hitler had on people. And that actually is going to lead us into our last big experiment that we talk about in this chapter. And then I'll give you guys a break to go watch the videos and then come back for the next lecture, which you don't really need to do till next week. So Stanley Milgram was a social psychologist in the 1960s at Yale. And he was really interested in could people that were known to be good people, innocent people, wouldn't hurt a fly people, could they be pressured into complying? Could they be pushed into doing things that they originally would have been thought to be incapable of doing? And so Milgram had an experiment that was designed after he thought about people in Nazi Germany. So the Holocaust was responsible for the extermination, quote unquote, of nearly 6 million Jewish people, or people that were identified as Jewish-like, not the Aryan race. And afterwards, Nazi soldiers that sent people to their deaths were asked about their actions. And you know what they said? What the most common response was? Well, I didn't kill anybody. I was just following orders. I was just doing what I was told. And a lot of people, of course, the narrative is that all the Nazis were evil people. And the question that Milgram had is, were these people actually evil, or were these just regular people that followed the wrong set of rules, right? So he set up his own experiment to sort of mimic this. And he wanted to know, would people actually do unspeakable and hurtful things just because they were told to? Or did they have enough wherewithal, I guess, to not just comply to things? So in Milgram's experiment, he had somebody hooked up to a machine that delivered shocks, and the shocks went from just a few volts to 450 volts, which could be potentially deadly. And so he explained that you're going to do a test like you're a teacher, and the person who is strapped into this thing has to get the right answer, and if they don't, they get a little shock that you deliver. Now, of course, it was completely fake, and we could never get away with something like this today, but they actually thought that they were shocking the person. And so basically they had to continue the test. They were in a different room, and the person was that was being shocked was in the other room answering questions. In this room, the person had the board in front of them with the shockers, you know, the little button to push. And each time they got it wrong, they had to up the voltage. And the only other person in the room was the supervisor, right, the researcher, who was just telling them, you have to continue. You have to continue. So in Milgram's experiment, what they saw was that people obeyed orders even when they thought they were harming another person. As these people got up to like 300 and above volts towards 450, at some point the guy just in the other room was saying, stop, stop, I can't take it, and then just didn't answer anymore. So he could have been passed out, he could have been dead, we don't know. So Milgram wanted to see how many people would go all the way to the 450 volts, right, to potentially delivering deadly shocks. And what the study revealed, as you'll see, is that about 2/3 of people, 67%, went all the way to the end. This was all done on males, it wasn't females, but think about Nazi Germany, it was all male soldiers, right? So ordinary people that were plucked for this study, 2/3 of them went all the way to the point of potentially killing another person by doing that, simply because they were told to. So what Milgram got from this experiment is that it showed if you have a strong social influence, and Hitler sure did, imagine what he'd be able to do with social media, right? Can make ordinary people conform to falsehoods, to lie about things, or to exhibit really cruel behavior, right? These people did not know they weren't actually hurting somebody. So there's a trade-off. We can never get these things, we could never run these studies now because of ethics issues, but you got the real raw data of what happened when people did back in the day. So it's a trade-off, right? So in any society, what Milgram confirmed or concluded from these experiments is that great evil acts can often grow out of people's compliance with lesser evils. So again, foot in the door technique. You get people to just arrest people for being different, and then you get them to put them in a concentration camp. And then eventually, because you've complied with a smaller request, and you want to be obedient, and you want to follow what everybody else is doing, and especially in this case, that Hitler established fear in people that didn't comply with what he wanted. You have the foot in the door phenomenon. You have the role-playing phenomenon of being a soldier in this war, being a Nazi and what it means, right? And you have conformity and obedience. So again, in his follow-up, 65% or so of the male teachers fully obeyed the experimenters' commands to go all the way to triple X, as you see, 450 volts. And again, please watch the video when we're done. And they fully obeyed the commands to continue. They did so despite the learner mentioning that he had a heart condition, and although it shouldn't be affected by it, that statement was still out there. And despite hearing cries of protest after they administered what they thought were anywhere from 150 volts to agonized protest after 330 volts to the last 120 volts or so, not even hearing a sound from the person in the other room, as if they were unconscious or, again, potentially even dead. So what did Milgram find? Again, when was obedience the highest? In this case, what he found was that obedience was highest when the person giving orders was right behind. So if you can see, I guess you can't see it in this picture, but as you will see from the video, the person in the lab coat, the researcher, was right behind the person saying, no, you have to keep going. So if they're right in your ear saying you have to keep going, okay, they're telling me and they're right there. And they were perceived as legitimate authority figure, so they continued. When the research was supported by a prestigious institution, again, this was Yale. When the victim was at a distance, if you probably saw them being shocked in the same room that you did it, you probably would have gotten less people to comply or to be obedient. When Nazis sent the Jewish people into gas chambers, they put them through a door, they closed the door, they couldn't see what was happening after that. So the victim, the people that they were executing, for lack of a better term, were at a distance. They were in a room and they just turned their back and that was it. And of course, there were no role models for defiance. So one of the things that's pointed out in the Solomon Asch conformity experiment is that compliance goes all the way down to 5% if just one of the people in your row agrees with you. So if you get one other person before you to say, oh, the answer was B or 2 and not 3, that makes you a lot more confident that you have a partner in crime or somebody that's on your side. And it's easier for you to speak out against the masses, right? So in this case, there wasn't another person in the room saying, maybe this isn't a good idea. And if at least one person was, then maybe a lot less people would do this. But everybody bought in Nazi Germany, everybody following orders, everybody was doing this. It's not me. I'm not the one that's giving the orders to send people to their death. It's from up above. I just have to comply because I'll get in trouble if I don't, and I'm just following orders, right? So Milgram found that he concluded that maybe not all these Nazis were as bad as history thinks they are. Yes, the people at the top were, but not necessarily them. We will come back and do the other half, but these 3 videos and the South Park Fun Goth Kids video are very informative and fun to watch. And yeah, so since we've gone on for so long already, let me go ahead and let you get to the videos, and I hope everybody's doing well. And as always, I'll talk to you soon.